Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Higher education doesn't exist apart from our political climate. That's becoming clearer with the Trump administration attempting to remove diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts or cut funding from schools with that programming. Colleges have had a choice. They can fight Trump or try to get along with him. Where universities are on this spectrum is dictated in part by the political leanings of their home state. This is what makes the case of former University of Michigan President Santa Ono so revealing. On May 4th, Ono resigned from the college with hopes of leading the University of Florida after he was recommended to the position. To get the job, Ono changed his positions on a range of topics. He claimed now to oppose DEI and that gender and biological sex are the same. But despite these pivots, the school's board of governors rejected his bid for the position this week. So what are we to make of the board's decision and Ono's changes? How is the state of higher education shifting in this political climate? And where does the University of Michigan sit within all of this? To discuss these things, we have David Jesse here. He's a senior writer covering leadership for the Chronicle of Higher Education. David, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
So Santa Ono was facing numerous issues because the University of Michigan was facing numerous challenges. In 2022, the school agreed to an almost $500 million settlement with over 1,000 people who say they were sexually assaulted by a former sports doctor while he was at the school. The football team has faced sign-stealing scandals. Pro-Palestinian protesters at the University of Michigan have led a range of Muslim, Arab, and Jewish students to say that they feel unsafe or they've been targeted. How did Ono react to these challenges?
Well, I think he reacted. How you think he reacted is largely based on how you fall on the political spectrum that you talked about as we kind of got started here, and the politicalization of the university. There are those who thought when, for example, the encampment that took place on U of M's campus, that he should have gone in much sooner.
For pro-Palestinian protesters we're talking about.
Sure, yep. Yeah, and so there are those who thought, hey, you should have gone right in and cleared that encampment right away. There are those who believe that he should have done nothing and just, let them stay as long as they wanted. And so I think one of the interesting things about this whole era is like the decisions that these presidents like Ono are making are really being viewed not necessarily through the lens of is it good for the university, but rather through the lens of a person's political beliefs. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but, you don't have to look any further for examples of that than his interview, in Florida the last couple weeks.
Yeah. Could you say a little bit about that interview and what stood out to you about it?
Yeah. So there was a couple phases. Florida set up a little differently in their higher education governance system than Michigan is. So in Michigan, the University of Michigan board has the final say on who to hire as their president. And so they, 3 years ago, hired Santa Ono. They're not going to start a search. In Florida, the University of Florida they get to make a decision, but then it has to be ratified by the higher education, a statewide higher education system board. And so over the last several weeks, both the University of Florida board and then this higher ed board really grilled Santa Ono, not on kind of traditional president issues like fundraising and student success and student access and athletics and all the stuff you might think. Instead, they really wanted to know about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They wanted to know about gender. They wanted to know about anti-Semitism. And so they, especially this last week, on Tuesday, really went after Santayana about his beliefs and his actions. And what they were really focused in on was the steps that he had taken at the University of Michigan on several of these issues, statements he had made supporting DEI, stuff like that. And then also kind of this now switch where he was saying, you know, I'm not going to have DEI in any of the, you know, at Florida at all. I'm going to crack down on anti-Semitism. And so, you know, he was talking about how his beliefs had evolved over time. And really they were trying to figure out if that was true, or was he just trying to say that in order to get a better paying job?
David, this falls squarely in your beat. As I mentioned, you're a senior writer covering leadership for the Chronicle of Higher Education. Was this unprecedented in terms of what you have seen here in terms of hearings for people about to lead a university?
It was in a couple of ways. One, Florida has never voted down a president ratification. And really, by the time a president gets to kind of that last public board vote, everybody's on board. They're kind of pro forma. Everybody knows that the vote's going to go yes. They have press releases scheduled. They have parties with donors. You know, I mean, like, you know, it's a celebratory thing. And this completely wasn't. It was a grilling. One of the board members down in Florida said it felt like that Santayana was on trial, was in court, and they were presenting documents and reading exhibits, and you know, really going after him. So that was unprecedented. And then I think it's unprecedented in what they were focused in on. Again, it wasn't, you know, how do you get more kids, more students to attend the University of Florida? How do you get more graduates? What are you going to work with the local business community? How are you going to increase research? These were all questions about politics and about political issues. What's your beliefs? What's your actions? And how you can bet that? And we haven't seen that level of those political questions being asked, certainly not in public before.
I want to play a clip of Alan Levine, who serves on the Board of Governors of the State University System of Florida. Here's Levine grilling Ono.
You did an interview on PBS where you advocated for a holistic admissions process, looking less at AP exams and classes and looking less at standardized tests. In January of this year, you implemented a holistic admissions process, going to test optional. What I'm trying to get at is what you've said before now, until a week ago, you support alternatives to merit-based admissions. I want to understand, do you believe, as you have in fact advocated and implemented this year, in test optional, looking less at AP courses is the right policy, or do you now no longer believe in holistic admissions, which you just put in place at Michigan?
Thank you for that question. As you know, these sorts of decisions are made in conversation with the entire board and with the provost and the deans of the institution. To answer your question, I believe that standardized tests are very, very important because it focuses on merit.
David, are other universities moving away from standardized testing? And I want to reiterate that what we just heard, as you noted, was quite unprecedented in terms of that back and forth.
Yes, other places are. Again, it comes down to a political belief of the state you're serving in, and then how that is represented in the board. So in Florida, the board members are appointed by Governor DeSantis. He very clearly has a point of view and has picked people who represent his point of view, a very conservative point of view. And so in that way, I think what the questioner was getting at was the role of race in admissions, or the role of affirmative action, which, as you and your listeners know, has been the subject of many lawsuits, many Supreme Court decisions, a couple involving the University of Michigan. And so I think that was kind of the subtext there of that question. How do you decide who gets in, and what's your thoughts and feelings on affirmative action in programs such as those?
I want to, David, play one more clip from that board meeting or hearing. Ono flipped his positions on a range of issues, claiming at the board meeting that there are two sexes and two genders, and that climate change is not an existential threat. Here he is discussing why he's against DEI, even though there's still DEI language on U of M's website.
If we don't see the balance of our grant deposited by early to mid-May, we have the potential to run out of funds. If we run out of those funds, it will create us to have to close classrooms and lay off staff.
That was actually not the cut that we were thinking about, David. So, you know what? I do want to ask you, though. I mean, we know that a lot of university presidents have been under fire, especially since protesters have been advocating for Palestinians. There have been a lot of people who report anti-Semitism as well and Islamophobia as big issues on campuses. It really does feel like there's a lot of tension, a lot of growing tension on college campuses. And again, you cover higher education. Can you ground us in this moment? Is this simply just a harder time to lead a university? I mean, the job has always been difficult, right?
Right. Yeah, being the college president has always been, or university president has always been tough, but it's taken a certain higher level, especially when you start talking about prominent public universities and even public or prominent private universities. So we're talking University of Michigan, University of Florida, Harvard, right? Columbia, certainly they're all over the news. There's these forces pulling at the colleges, and I think we're in a really interesting time where we're trying to define what a university is and how they should react to some of these issues. And so you have a school of thought that says, on the Palestinian issue, we should take a side. We should pick. We should divest from our endowment. There are others who push a institutional neutrality. The institution should be neutral and should encourage debate on all these issues. And so I think we're at a place that is tougher than it has been, and where we're really kind of trying to figure out what the soul of the university is going to be. And I mean, that's why, for example, the Trump administration is spending so much time and so much effort battling Harvard and Columbia and in Florida with Santa Ono that we just saw this week. They were trying to clearly define a point of view and a path forward for their university. I mean, there's no argument, and they mentioned it during the interview process, there's no argument that Santa Ono, by all traditional measures, respected researcher, academic, has come up. Like, his curriculum vitae is incredible in the traditional sense. But that seems to not necessarily be what boards are looking for and the people who appoint boards. And so in that way, I think we're at a very key and interesting, and you've used the word a couple times, unprecedented moment in higher education.
Indeed, and we will be talking to you again to look at what the soul of the University of Michigan ends up being in these changing times. David Jesse, senior writer covering leadership for the Chronicle of Higher Education. David, thanks for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.